Well, welcome everyone. I hope you're getting really excited to be part of the Stanford Energy community. We're very excited to have you here. And I'll jump right into it because they're going to be strict on time. All right, so I research behavior and energy. And I'm first going to give you a quick overview of what that entails, and then I'll jump into some specific work I've been doing. So some examples of how behavior is relevant, because I feel like it really spills into everything. On the business side, getting effective leadership within companies, breaking down silos between parts of organizations to improve efficiency, incentives and recognition for efficiency savings at companies, not just revenue generation, addressing the landlord-tenant incentive problem. On the residential side, policies and incentives, behavior spills into the built environment and technology, and you'll see some of that. It's relevant to media and marketing campaigns as well as community-based programs. And I will be at lunch today, so I'm going to go through quickly now, but if folks have questions, obviously during the Q&A, but also at lunch, feel free. Okay, when I talk about behavior in the residential sector, people often think that I mean basic things like turning off lights, and they think, well, you know, probably doesn't have that big of an impact. Should I pay too much attention? But really, again, I feel like behavior spills into everything. So it's relevant to the purchase and installation of energy efficient technology, to reducing energy waste, like unplugging extra devices that aren't in use, shifting settings, installing controls, repairing items or performing maintenance, and as well as adjusting habits. Okay, so the main thing I've been working on is a grant that we got a couple of years ago, and it's funded by ARPA-E at Department of Energy, as well as the California Energy Commission. And it's a fairly large grant. Professor Byron Reeves is the faculty director, soon to be switched to Jim Sweeney, and I'm the project director. It's very interdisciplinary. We have a span of 15 faculty across about 10 different departments. The departments range from civil and environmental engineering, computer science and electrical engineering, management science and engineering / economics, sort of on the one hand, and on the other hand, as well as design, and on the other hand, psychology, education, communications, and behavioral epidemiology at the School of Medicine. So it's a great and very diverse team. We have, depending on how you count, about 12 to 20 different projects going on. Okay, so our grant attempts to address the following problems. First, billions are being spent to produce smart infrastructure. For example, with all of the California investor-owned utility territory having smart meters installed already, and an estimated half of the US by 2020, yet the energy savings potential of this infrastructure, without careful consideration of the human element, won't reach its full potential. The second problem we attempt to address is that energy efficiency is difficult. Figuring out what to do and how to do it is difficult and boring. So how can we address both of these issues? How can we leverage smart infrastructure to maximize energy savings? Okay, so our solution is quantification, because sensors provide data and allow us to do quantification. With quantified data, we can provide diagnostics and personalized recommendations. We can increase motivation through specialized behavioral techniques such as feedback, incentives, markets, competitions, data visualization. And we can also use the data to create best programs with improved speed, ease, cost, and scale through objective evaluation of program energy savings. And there's several other benefits as well, but we'll start with these. Okay, so here's an overview of our project. We have a unique opportunity at this point in history, because on the left, we have wireless sensors which are becoming pervasive. And on the right, we have web-enabled devices so that computers and phones can deliver programs at scale to help individuals reduce energy use. And we haven't had these before fairly recently. In the middle, we have Stanford's engine, which links the two. The first bucket in red is the technology platform, which includes projects that use sensor data to perform analytics, like diagnostics on where a given individual should save energy through disaggregation. The technology platform also supports data capture and storage and some other analytics. The second bucket in green includes our programs or interventions. They live on top of the technology platform, and this is most of what I'll talk about today. And then the third bucket in blue includes modeling and evaluation. So here, quantification allows us to quantify program savings, improve programs, and inform policy. So all the projects center around how we can leverage smart meter and other sensor data with behavioral techniques to maximize energy savings. Okay, so here's a web page where we can get to 5 out of the 7 of our behavioral interventions. I showed pictures of all of them here. And if you click on any one of them, they go to a project, which I'm going to give you a quick overview of several of the projects. And these are from that middle bucket of behavioral programs. So first we have Powerhouse. This project is led by Professor Reeves in the communications department. And there's a bunch of different functionality in the game. You can see an illustration of showing people smart meter feedback data. People can challenge one another through their connections and Facebook Connect to have Friday night lights out challenges, et cetera, and then you have an objective measure of who's won. The larger picture here is a game that's embedded within the larger framework or website. And in this game, the characters, household members, run around the house, and you help them to try to achieve all of their goals while using the smallest amount of energy. And this is interesting from a psychological standpoint because the time is sped up very quickly, and people receive feedback or reinforcement through points as to whether they're doing a good job. And so it actually trains people up fairly quickly on habits that they should be doing. And Professor Reeves has run a couple of studies with this, and I believe the work is submitted for publication. And that's true, actually, of pretty much all the projects I'll be talking about today, because our initiative's been going on for a couple of years. There's experiments and things have either been submitted or published, and then work is continuing. Okay, a second set of projects is through Professor Vani Banerjee at the Design School. And he heads up the Change Labs. 2 of his projects are Kidogo and Power Tower. In Kidogo, you accumulate financial savings based on your energy savings, and then you can put those financial savings towards microfinancing individuals in developing countries. And the premise behind this is that in the United States, the amount of money that you save through your energy savings is relatively small, but when you have the perception of applying it in a microfinance situation where a small amount goes a longer way, you really psychologically stretch the value of that amount of savings. A second project that he did allows people to collaborate within a team and also compete against other teams to in a Tetris-like game where the blocks are allotted based on your energy savings. A third project is led by Professor Balaji Prabhakar, and he'll be talking a little later today. But the work that he did with us is specifically on the application of lottery-like principles to a situation where people save energy in their transportation by shifting time of use and other things. We have an energy calculator led by Professor Sam McClure in the psychology department. This project, so some of our projects, we get diffusion through Facebook. This project is on Google AdWords, and we've gotten about 30,000 users last year. And the premise behind this is that people tend to make non-energy efficient appliance purchase decisions because they pay more attention to the upfront cost of the appliance rather than the savings over time that would accumulate from the energy efficient appliance. So that's called the first cost bias. And in energy efficiency, it's pretty robust, particularly with large appliances like refrigerators. And so what we attempted to do is show them the savings that they would get over time. So we basically sort of solve the cognitive problem for them so that they can see it. Now, interestingly, when we did this for them, it didn't influence their click-throughs and viewings of those items and putting them on their short list, which we used as a proxy for purchasing, which we didn't have because they went off to Amazon to actually or Sears to actually purchase it. But interestingly, we tried some other manipulations, and when we picked the most robust behavior change principles from behavioral economics, simple things like changing the sort order so that the most energy efficient items were simply at the top of the sort list, we actually got an average of people choosing energy efficient, people choosing appliances that were 20% more energy efficient than otherwise. And that's really interesting from a scientific perspective, because we tend to think that if we have a problem and we deconstruct it and determine what the real cause is and address that real cause, that we're going to be able to solve that problem. And yet in this case, simply picking the most effective techniques that we knew and applying in this situation was actually more effective than using the typical approach of deconstructing a problem and trying to solve it that way. One of our other projects is the Girl Scouts project. So we picked the Girl Scouts because 1 in every 2 women or girls were or are Girl Scouts, and it's a very organized organization. So there's possibility for high diffusion, and we also know that community-based programs tend to be fairly effective because it's a heavy touch point. So anyhow, in this case, we had 30 troops that we randomized to either transportation and food condition or a home electricity and gas condition, and each served as a control for the other, and we're in process of writing that up now. Okay, I mentioned that we also have a couple of analytics projects. Ram Rajagopal is going to be talking in a little while. He'll tell you probably about some of that. We also had a stream of work in energy disaggregation. So disaggregation allows us to take a whole building or aggregate energy signal and separate it into appliance-specific data. And so that can be helpful for people in guiding them to see what changes they should make in their home. So I don't have time to go too much into this stuff, but feel free to talk to me more about it later. So we can take a question or two while we're waiting for this to...
Hi, good morning. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the incentives that some of the programs provide for people to actually change their behavior.
Okay, so Balaji will talk a little bit later today about incentives in his lottery-like program, but the basic gist there is that he does his programs in situations where there's a set of funds that can be used, usually to offset fees that will be charged from a place like Singapore or Santa Clara County in the case of Stanford University campus. So an organization has a certain pot of funds, but if they paid out to each individual person, based on their performance, the amount of savings, it would be extremely small and completely unmotivating. And so what he does instead is pool together those savings and have a lottery. So if you perform the correct behaviors, you have a chance at winning those savings. And it ends up people are very poor at assessing risk and make a misjudgment, and they're much more engaged. And he layers on with that some social networking stuff. And so he actually has very good effectiveness based on using the lottery-like system instead. There's so I don't want to spend too much time because I want to show this and there's other questions, but we can talk about it more later. But I will say that you do have to be a little bit careful about incentives, because if you pay people for stuff and the amount of money, if they attributed their actions to the money, then when you take away the money, you can actually get a boomerang effect, which means that their performance is worse than it was before you gave them the incentive. So sometimes it just goes back to baseline, but sometimes it actually gets worse. And that's been borne out in many studies. And the reason is because, or at least it seems this way based on the experimental evidence, some of the studies that have been done, is that people attribute their motivation to doing it to the money once you start giving them money. Yeah. So it's just need to be careful when doing that. All right. So any more questions? Yeah.
You talked about working on incentives with homeowners and renters. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I don't work on that specifically. Oh, wait. Are you talking about my first slide where I talked about the landlord-tenant problem? Okay. So I brought that up as an illustration in the business scenario, but it does apply in the residential sector as well. We haven't worked on that specifically. In this work, we're more targeting homeowners because they can make larger purchase changes, heating systems, etc. But the renter population is quite large, and it is relevant, and a lot of this stuff should apply to them as well, just not all of it, and some of it may not be as high impact. But that problem is an interesting one, and I have talked to some VCs about it, and Jim Sweeney is interested in it. So, I'm going to leave it at that, but during lunch, if you want to talk about it some more, and you might want to follow up with Jim, because he has some thoughts on that. Okay. Yep.
Who are most of the people who are using this right now? Is it mostly Stanford and community?
So this particular integrated program or all the programs? Okay. So as far as all the programs go, we have different subject populations for the different programs. I mentioned Google AdWords, we have about 30,000 people in that. Balaji Prabhakar in the lottery stuff. He did a study in Singapore and then also on Stanford campus. Some of the testing has been done in student populations. We tend to use community college students rather than Stanford students because we think they're probably more typical of the general population. For this particular project, we just finished creating the real basic part of it at the end of the spring. So we've really only done small scale pilot testing of, I don't know, like 45 people on it, just friends and family type stuff. So we have a couple more pieces that we want to build out, and then hopefully this fall we'll start doing larger scale, more rigorous testing of that. So I guess the short answer that you might be wondering about is how much scale do we have at this point? And for most of the projects, like Balaji's project, I think he had about 15,000 people in his last study, and then the appliance calculator about 30,000 people, et cetera. We haven't, so it's ranged from like a few dozen to that scale so far, but the goal for an integrative project is that we would scale out throughout the US and hopefully hit a fairly large proportion of people.
So the hope is long-term to create an actual product as opposed
yes.
to the research to support
and
people.
Yeah, and in fact, the funding from DOE is specifically for the next phase, is specifically for scaling out and making it self-sustaining. Yeah. Did you have a question? No. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you get the energy data about the specific energy use from different appliances?
Right. So there's a variety of ways to get the energy data, period, and then I'll tell you about the disaggregation in a second. So there's a lot of pieces of hardware on the market now where you can hook it up to your circuit breaker box, whatever. But we decided we did explore that, and actually Phil Levis's team on campus started making a piece of hardware and blah, blah, blah. But the short of it is that we felt like we were never going to get high diffusion if we went that route. And so then we switched gears and decided that we'd probably have to use smart meter data because the penetration is fairly large. Like all of California and all of Texas have smart meters in all residential and commercial buildings. You might be familiar that smart meter data, typically what you see is hour data. And that frequency is very difficult to do disaggregation. So then the second piece of it is you could install plug load monitors on all your devices. Nobody's ever going to do that. So instead we pursued a statistical approach, seeing whether we could analyze the data to infer which appliances went on at different times. And people have actually been working on this problem for quite a while, very small numbers of people, but for a few decades. It was popular in like the 70s when there was more of an energy crisis, totally died down in the last couple of years, kind of hit a revival, and the data is better now. So there's a few companies that work on getting the data from smart meters in the 10-second range, and can do about 10 appliances disaggregated. So as long as somebody has a smart meter in these places, and we're interfacing with Bidgely, which is one of these companies doing the disaggregation, they can automatically see it. So they might need to put in their utility username and password, but that's basically it, and they can see their data. I can talk to you a little bit more about this. There's one more piece of it that relates to activating your home area network so that you can get the 10-second data, but that's becoming fairly routine by utilities in the large states. Yeah.
So do you guys have to work with the electric companies?
No, we and I'm out of time, so I'll wrap up right after this, but initially we thought it would be beneficial to do this, and we beat our heads against the wall for about 3 years. And we have good relationships with all of them, but they're just very slow, and it's a huge amount of effort to do. And so, so there's a few different ways that the utility companies have routines to make it available to anybody, and so we can tap into it. The users have to give, the residents have to give permission, obviously, but it doesn't require any special treatment of us by the utilities. And in part, the Department of Energy has been excellent about, and the national government, the Chief Technology Officer's office have been really great about pushing the utilities into making it more streamlined to do that. Yeah. Great.